This blind girl was about to jump off a bridge, but she's stopped by a millionaire. But when he was confident that everything would be all right, she trips, and what happens next is shocking. Comment on what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Richard Lucas straightened his expensive tie as he watched the numbers on his screen change rapidly. The stock market trading floor was buzzing that afternoon, but his experienced eyes no longer showed any emotion in the face of the dizzying fluctuations that made fortunes appear and disappear in a matter of seconds. At 45, he had built an empire based on his ability to keep his cool even in the tensest situations. The sun was beginning to set when he decided to wrap up another profitable day. He grabbed his Italian leather briefcase and went down to the garage of the commercial building, where his office occupied the penthouse. The black Porsche responded to the touch of the key with a discreet beep. Richard settled into the leather seat and started the engine, feeling the smooth vibration of the luxury car. He chose a different route than usual to avoid the typical rush-hour traffic in downtown Chicago. The alternative route took him through a less busy area of the city, bordering one of the few rivers that still cut through the metropolis. That's when something caught his attention. A small figure stood out against the orange sky. A child was standing on the edge of the bridge, so close to the edge that it made his heart race. Richard slammed on the brakes, parking the car haphazardly on the shoulder. His Italian shoes hit the asphalt as he ran toward the girl. He approached, cautiously, afraid to startle her. She was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, wearing a simple dress and worn sandals. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon in a strange way, as if she wasn't really seeing the landscape in front of her. "Hi," he called softly, taking another step towards her. "Is everything okay?" The girl turned slowly towards him, and Richard noticed something different in her gaze. Her pupils moved erratically, as if struggling to focus on him. "Are you here to see the sunset too, mister?" she asked in a sweet voice. "Daddy said I need to remember this picture in my mind, because soon I won't be able to see anymore." Richard felt a lump form in his throat. The girl was losing her sight. Before he could answer, a stronger wind blew, causing the little girl to lose her balance. It was as if time slowed down. Richard saw the exact moment her feet lost contact with the concrete. Without thinking twice, he threw himself forward, trying to reach her. His fingers brushed the fabric of her dress, but couldn't grab it. The girl's scream echoed through the bridge as she plunged towards the dark waters of the river. Richard didn't even hesitate. In one swift motion, he tore off his designer jacket and jumped after her. The impact with the icy water was like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. The current was stronger than he expected, and the visibility inside the water was almost non-existent. His heart pounded against his chest as he frantically searched for any sign of the little girl. A glimpse of fabric caught his attention, a few feet away. He swam with all the strength he could muster, fighting against the current that tried to drag him. He finally reached the girl, who was struggling in panic, swallowing water. He wrapped one arm around her while using the other to try to reach the shore. The fight against the current seemed endless. His muscles burned with the effort, and the weight of the soaked clothes made each movement more difficult. The girl had stopped struggling, becoming dead weight in his arms, which only increased his despair. When he finally managed to reach the shore, Richard was exhausted. He dragged himself out of the water with the girl in his arms, gently laying her on the grass. She wasn't breathing. With trembling hands, he began the resuscitation procedures he had learned years ago in a corporate course that he never imagined he would need to use. "Come on, little one," he murmured between compressions. "Breathe, please." After what seemed like an eternity, the girl coughed violently, expelling the water she had swallowed. Her eyes opened, disoriented as she tried to catch her breath. "It's okay," Richard reassured her, holding her small hand. "You're safe now." "Lily!" A desperate cry cut through the air. An elderly man came running towards them, limping visibly. "My daughter!" The man knelt beside them, taking the girl in his arms, with tears streaming down his wrinkled face. His calloused hands trembled as he checked if his daughter was okay. "Daddy," Lily whispered, clinging to him. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to see the river one last time." Richard watched the scene, feeling something strange in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. For the first time in many years, the numbers and charts that dominated his mind gave way to something different. The image of that little girl, so fragile and yet so brave, facing a world that was slowly fading before her eyes. The man turned to him, still embracing his daughter. "You saved my Lily," his voice cracked. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Richard replied, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "What's your name?" "Bernard Gouteau," the man answered, helping Lily to her feet. Richard noticed that his clothes were simple and worn, his hands marked by hard work. "I work at the lumberyard nearby. Lily stays at daycare during the day, but today..." He hesitated, looking at his daughter with concern. "She wandered off when the teacher got distracted," he finished, running a hand through his graying hair. "With her vision getting worse, it's getting harder and harder." Richard stood up, feeling the weight of his soaked clothes. His Italian suit was ruined, as were his expensive shoes. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care. All he could think about was the courage of that little girl, determined to hold on to her last visual memories before the darkness completely enveloped her. In the days that followed, Richard couldn't get Lily and her father out of his head. The image of the little girl on the edge of the bridge haunted him, making him wake up in the middle of the night covered in cold sweat. During important meetings, he found himself wondering if she was okay, if she had made it to daycare safely, if her elderly father was able to take care of her alone. A week after the incident, Richard decided to stop by the lumberyard where Bernard worked. He parked his new car, since the previous one had to go to the shop after being abandoned on the bridge, and watched the activity of the place. His heart ached as he saw the man carrying heavy boxes, his back arched with the effort, his face etched with fatigue. Bernard worked non-stop, stacking lumber and organizing deliveries. Even at his advanced age, he didn't allow himself to slow down. Richard understood why. A single man raising a daughter who was losing her sight couldn't afford to rest. He was about to get out of the car to talk to him when a strange commotion caught his attention. A tall stack of boxes began to sway dangerously. Bernard was right below it, focused on his task, unaware of the danger. "Watch out!" Richard shouted, but it was too late. The noise was deafening. The boxes collapsed like a house of cards, knocking Bernard to the ground. Richard ran towards him, his heart pounding in his chest. Other employees also approached, forming a circle around the fallen man. "Call an ambulance!" someone yelled. Bernard was conscious, but his breathing was labored. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, and he groaned in pain as he tried to move. "Lily," he murmured, trying to get up. "I need to pick up my daughter." "Stay still." Richard held him gently. "I'll take care of that." "Where is she?" "Little Sunshine Daycare," Bernard replied with difficulty. "On Maple Street. She expects me at 5. Richard promised that he would pick up the girl, trying to convey tranquility to the injured man. The ambulance arrived in a few minutes, taking Bernard to the nearest hospital. Richard followed. The vehicle in his car, his stomach churning with worry. At the hospital, the news wasn't good. In addition to the external injuries, Bernard had suffered serious internal injuries. The doctors did everything they could, but his elderly and worn body couldn't resist. He passed away on the operating table, without having the chance to say goodbye to his daughter. Richard felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. How would he break this news to Lily? The little girl, who was already facing the gradual loss of her vision, would now have to deal with the loss of her father, her only family in the world. He drove to the daycare with a heavy heart. When he arrived, Lily was sitting on a bench in the yard, swinging her little legs in the air. Her eyes, which still retained a small remnant of vision, tried to focus on the shapes around her. "Mr. Richard?" She recognized his voice when he approached. "Where's Daddy?" He knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. How to explain to a 5-year-old child that her father, the person she loved most in the world, would never come back? "Lily, something very sad happened," he began, feeling his throat tighten. "Your father, he had an accident at work." The girl squeezed his hands tightly. "He's going to be okay, right? He always says he's strong." Richard felt tears escape his eyes for the first time in years. "He was very strong, little one, the strongest man I've ever known. But sometimes even strong people have to go." Lily was silent for a moment, as if processing the information. Then her little face contorted in an expression of such deep pain that it broke Richard's heart. "No," she whispered, tears starting to fall. "No, Daddy can't go. He promised he'd stay with me. He promised." Richard hugged her as she sobbed, her small body trembling with the force of her crying. The daycare director, who was watching the scene from a distance, approached with tears in her eyes. "We need to contact Child Protective Services," she informed him in a low voice. "Lily has no other relatives." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Lily would be put up for adoption, a blind, orphaned child thrown into the system, with no one to protect her. "No," he said firmly, "I'm going to take care of her." The director looked at him with surprise. "Sir, it's not that simple. There are legal procedures." "Then I'll follow them all," Richard replied, still hugging the crying girl. "I'll do whatever it takes, but I won't abandon her." That night, after completing the initial procedures with Child Protective Services and ensuring that Lily remained temporarily in the care of the daycare, Richard returned to his penthouse apartment, the place he once considered a symbol of his. Success now seemed cold and empty. He sat in his designer armchair, looking out the window that offered a privileged view of the city. In his mind, he saw Bernard smile as he thanked him for saving his daughter, heard his weak voice in the hospital asking him to pick up Lily. That man had dedicated every moment of his life to taking care of his daughter, working beyond his strength to ensure she had the best possible. "I promise, Bernard," he murmured to the silence of the apartment. "I'll take care of her as if she were my own daughter." Little did he know that this promise would be much more difficult to fulfill than he imagined. Fate had other plans, and the battle to protect Lily was just beginning. A shadow was approaching, threatening to destroy the chance of happiness for the little girl who had already lost so much. Richard spent the following week immersed in documents and meetings with lawyers. His office, previously dedicated exclusively to financial operations, was now filled with papers related to the adoption process. He studied every detail, determined not to leave any loophole that could prevent him from getting custody of Lily. He visited the girl every day at the daycare, which had received special authorization to keep her temporarily. Lily still cried a lot, especially at night, calling for her father. Her vision continued to diminish gradually, which made everything even more frightening for her. "Mr. Richard," she asked one afternoon, as they shared a snack in the daycare. "Yard, why is it so hard to see the colors? I used to be able to see better." His heart tightened. The doctors had warned that the visual degeneration was progressing faster than expected, probably accelerated by the emotional trauma of losing her father. "It's normal, little one," he replied softly, helping her find her juice glass. "But you're very brave, and I'll always be here to help you. Promise you won't leave like Daddy did?" she asked, her small voice filled with fear. "I promise," he replied, swallowing the lump that formed in his throat. That same afternoon, Richard received a call that would change everything. It was his lawyer with news that left him stunned. "Mr. Lucas, a complication has arisen." The voice on the other end of the line sounded worried. "Another couple has filed for adoption of Lily, and they have already obtained temporary custody." Richard felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean? Who are these people?" "Fernando and Regina Mendez," the lawyer replied. "They are very influential in social circles, known for philanthropic endeavors. They have adopted other children before." The news hit him like a bomb. Richard knew the Mendez by sight. They were a constant presence at charity events and social pages. Fernando was a real estate entrepreneur, always shrouded in an air of mystery. Regina was famous for her luxurious parties and connections with high society. But how did they get it so fast? Richard questioned, the frustration evident in his voice. "They have strong connections in the adoption system," the lawyer explained. "And well, they're a couple. In the judge's view, they can offer a more traditional family environment." Richard spent the night awake, researching the Mendez. Something didn't add up. Why would such a rich and well-connected couple have a specific interest in Lily? There were so many other children in need of a home. The next morning, he went to the daycare earlier than usual, determined to spend as much time as possible with Lily before she was taken away. He found the girl more agitated than usual. "Mr. Richard," she whispered when he approached, "there are some strange people here. They say they're going to take me to a new house." He turned and saw Regina Mendez talking to the director. She was an elegant woman, in her 40s, dressed impeccably. But there was something in her eyes that bothered him, a coldness that contrasted with her rehearsed smile. "Mrs. Mendez," Richard approached, keeping his tone polite. "Could we talk for a moment?" Regina examined him from head to toe, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Ah, you must be Mr. Lucas. I've heard about your interest in the girl." "Lily isn't just an interest," he replied, controlling his irritation. "I know her. I know what she needs. She's losing her sight. She needs special care." "And you don't think we can provide that?" Regina interrupted, her sugary voice carrying a hint of irony. "We are perfectly capable of taking care of her. We have experience with adoption, unlike you." Before Richard could answer, Fernando Mendez appeared. He was a burly man with a stogie dangling from the corner of his mouth. His small eyes studied Richard with suspicion. "Any problem here?" he asked, placing his hand on his wife's shoulder. "None, darling," Regina replied sweetly. "Mr. Lucas is just having difficulty understanding that Lily now has a real family." Richard watched helplessly as they approached Lily. The girl flinched instinctively when Regina tried to touch her. "Come on, dear," Regina called. "Let's go to your new home." "I don't want to go," Lily murmured, looking for Richard. "I want to stay with Mr. Richard." "Now don't be stubborn," Regina scolded, her tone losing some of its sweetness. "We're your parents now. You need to obey." Richard felt his heart break as he watched Lily being practically dragged out of the daycare. The girl was crying, calling for him, her little hands outstretched in the air trying to find him. "Mr. Richard, don't let them take me, please." He took a step forward, but Fernando blocked his path. "Don't make this harder," he warned in a low voice. "You have no rights over her." And as the Mendez car drove away, taking Lily, Richard remained standing in the daycare yard, feeling more powerless than he had ever felt in his entire life. All his money, all his power seemed useless at that moment. But something inside him refused to give up. Regina's cold expression, the way Fernando had stared at him, Lily's desperate cry, all of this set off an alarm in his mind. There was something wrong with that situation, and he would find out what it was. "Mr. Lucas," the director's voice, pulled him from his thoughts. She looked worried. There's something I need to tell you about other children the Mendes have adopted. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Perhaps there was the beginning of the answer he sought. But what he would discover would leave him even more desperate to save Lily from a fate he couldn't even imagine. The director led Richard to her office, closing the door carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she rummaged in a drawer from which she took a yellowed folder. In the past 5 years, the Mendes have adopted 3 other children, she began, flipping through the documents. All of them attended our daycare for a short period. Richard leaned forward, interested. And what happened to those children? That's the problem, the director sighed heavily. After a few months, they just disappeared. The Mendes said they had moved to other cities, but something never seemed right to me. She took some photos from the folder. Smiling children in different moments of the day at the daycare. This is Marina. She was the first. She had Down syndrome. The Mendes adopted her very quickly, saying they would give her all the special treatment she needed. After 4 months, they said they took her to a specialized clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. We never heard from them again. Richard felt a knot in his stomach as the director continued. Then came Peter, who had a heart problem, and finally Ana Luisa, who suffered from a rare kidney disease. The pattern was always the same: children with special needs who needed expensive care. How did no one investigate this? Richard asked, his mind racing with frightening possibilities. I tried, the director replied, her voice filled with guilt. I filed reports, I sought information, but the Mendes are very well connected. All my attempts were shelved before they even started. Richard ran a hand through his hair, processing the information. Lily, with her progressive visual impairment, fit the pattern perfectly. But what was the Mendes' real interest in these children? He left the daycare straight for the office of his most trusted private investigator. Pete Sampson was known for his discretion and efficiency. For years, he had helped Richard investigate potential business partners and competitors. I need everything you can find on the Mendes, Richard instructed, handing over an envelope with the initial information, especially about the children they adopted before. I want to know where they are now. While waiting for the first information, Richard tried to maintain contact with Lily. He called the Mendes mansion daily, but Regina always had an excuse. Lily was sleeping, was at the doctor, was busy with adaptation classes. After a week of frustrated attempts, he decided to go to the house in person. The Mendes mansion was an imposing building in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in town, likely near Lake Forest. Richard rang the doorbell, feeling uneasy. A maid answered, seeming nervous to see him. I'm sorry, sir, but the family isn't receiving visitors. Please, Richard insisted, handing over a card. I just want to know how Lily is. 5 minutes. The maid looked around as if afraid of being watched. Then she lowered her voice. You should come back later after 6. That's when Mrs. Regina leaves for her charity gala. Richard understood the message between the lines. He returned at the suggested time, finding the same maid. She quickly led him inside, always looking around with concern. The girl spends most of her time alone in her room, she whispered as they climbed the stairs. She cries a lot, asks about you. Mrs. Regina doesn't like anyone spending too much time with her. As they opened the door to the room, Richard felt his heart clench. The space was large and luxurious, but it felt more like a gilded cage. Lily was sitting in a corner, hugging her knees. Lily, he called softly. Her little face lit up when she recognized his voice. Mr. Richard. She tried to get up, tripping over her own feet. Her vision had worsened considerably that week. Richard rushed to support her, taking her in his arms. Lily clung to him, sobbing, Please take me away from here. I don't like it here. Mrs. Regina doesn't let anyone play with me. She says I'm too clumsy. He caressed her hair, noticing that it was unkempt, so different from the care that Bernard had always taken with his daughter. Are they treating you well, little one? Are you eating properly? Lily shook her head negatively. The food always comes cold, and I can't eat properly by myself now, but no one wants to help me. The maid, who was watching the scene from the indoor, interfered in a low voice. Mrs. Regina says she needs to learn to fend for herself, that we can't spoil her, but the girl can barely see anything anymore. Richard examined the room more closely. There were no toys suitable for a child with visual impairment, no braille materials, no indication that they were really concerned about Lily's adaptation. A noise downstairs startled the maid. Mrs. Regina is back early. You need to leave. No! Lily clung tighter to Richard. Don't go! With a broken heart, he gently disentangled himself from her little arms. I promise I'll get you out of here. Little one, I just need you to be strong for a little longer. The maid quickly led him through a service staircase. He had barely left when he heard Regina's voice in Lily's room, her tone falsely sweet. What are you doing awake, dear? You know you can't wander around the room alone. It's dangerous. Richard returned to his car, feeling a mixture of anger and determination. At that moment, his cell phone rang. It was Pete Sampson. Chief, I found out some things about the Mendes. You need to see this immediately. Half an hour later, Richard was in his office, examining the documents that Pete had gathered. With each page he read, he felt his stomach sink further. The mystery behind the Mendes adoptions was darker than he could imagine. They receive large amounts of money from social programs and donations for each special child they adopt, Pete explained, in addition to considerable tax breaks, but the money is never really used on the children's treatment. And where does this money go? Richard asked, dreading the answer. To offshore accounts in the names of shell corporations. It's an elaborate money laundering scheme. The children are just pawns in the game. Richard closed his eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. Now he understood why the other children had disappeared. As soon as the Mendes managed to extract the maximum financial benefits possible from each adoption, they simply got rid of them and moved on to the next. Lily, he murmured, remembering the girl's frightened little face. We need to get her out of there before it's too late. Richard spent the following days putting together a complete dossier on the Mendes. With Pete's help, he managed to track down the fate of some of the children previously adopted by them. What he discovered made him even more desperate to save Lily. Marina, the first girl they adopted, had been sent to an orphanage in another state under a different name. Pete found records of her in an institution in rural Kentucky, where no one knew of her previous history with the Mendes. The girl, now 12 years old, was not receiving any of the specialized treatments she needed. Pete had also located Ana Luisa in a foster home in rural Tennessee, also registered with another name. The rare kidney disease, which the Mendes had promised to treat, was in an advanced stage due to lack of proper care. Only Peter remained, missing. No record, no trace of his whereabouts. It was as if the boy had simply vanished from the system. How do they get away with this? Richard asked Pete during one of their meetings. How does no one notice? It's a complex system, Pete explained, spreading documents on the table. They have connections in record offices, in the social welfare system, even with some judges. They can alter records, transfer children between states, create new identities. Richard spent sleepless nights, thinking of Lily alone in that room, her vision diminishing every day, without receiving the necessary care. The maid who had helped him was fired shortly after his visit, according to Pete. Regina claimed breach of trust. One morning, while reviewing more documents in his office, Richard received an unexpected call. It was a woman who identified herself as a former employee of the Mendes. I saw a picture of the blind girl they adopted on the street, she said, her voice trembling. "Please, get her out of there. I saw what happened to the others." Richard immediately asked her to come to his office. Maria, as she identified herself, had worked as a cook at the Mendez mansion during the 3 previous adoptions. Her account was disturbing. "They never cared about the children," she said, twisting a tissue in her hands. "Mrs. Regina barely looked at them. Mr. Fernando only showed up when there was a charity event to take pictures. The rest of the time, the children were locked up, alone." She paused, as if gathering courage to continue. "One night, I overheard an argument between them. Mrs. Regina was furious because Marina had broken an expensive porcelain doll. She said they had already gotten enough money from that adoption, that it was time to move on to the next." Richard felt a chill. And what happened next? The next morning, Marina had disappeared. They said she had been transferred to a special treatment facility in Rochester. But I saw when they took her away at night, crying. Maria continued, her account, tears streaming down her face. The same pattern was repeated with Peter and Ana Luisa. As soon as the Mendez managed to extract the maximum financial benefits possible from each adoption, the children were removed silently during the night. "Why didn't you report it?" Richard asked, although he already imagined the answer. "I tried," she replied, wiping her eyes. "I went to the police, to Child Protective Services, but Mr. Fernando has people everywhere. I ended up being accused of theft, lost my job, almost went to jail. No one wanted to listen to me." Richard recorded Maria's entire statement. It was the first real witness he had against the Mendez, someone who had witnessed their crimes directly. But he knew he needed more. The couple was too powerful to be brought down only with the testimony of a former employee. That same afternoon, he received another worrying information from Pete. The Mendez had initiated the process to receive a substantial benefit from the government, claiming expenses for specialized treatments for Lily. "They are accelerating the process," Pete warned, "following the pattern of other adoptions. As soon as they get that money." Richard didn't need him to complete the sentence. Lily would be the next to disappear. Desperate, he attempted one last visit to the Mendez mansion. This time, it was Regina who received him, her cold smile more threatening than any expression of anger. "Mr. Lucas," she said, blocking the entrance, "your visits are starting to become inconvenient. Lily is our daughter now. You need to accept that and move on with your life." "Where is she?" Richard demanded. "I want to see her." "Impossible. She's resting. The doctor recommended absolute rest." "What doctor?" he pressed. "What treatment is she receiving?" Regina's smile wavered for a moment. "That's none of your business. If you insist on this behavior, I'll be forced to take legal action." When Regina slammed the door in his face, Richard remained standing for a few minutes, watching the mansion. A movement upstairs caught his attention. For a moment, he saw Lily's little face pressed against the window, her small hands touching the glass as if trying to reach him. Back in the car, Richard grabbed the phone with trembling hands. "Pete, I need you to step up surveillance, 24 hours a day. Any suspicious movement, any sign that they're planning to take Lily, let me know immediately." As he drove back home, Richard felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. It wasn't just a matter of fulfilling the promise made to Bernard. It was about saving an innocent child from people who saw her only as a source of profit. What he didn't know was that the Mendez were also watching his movements, and they wouldn't allow anyone to interfere with their plans. The battle for Lily's life was about to become even more dangerous. The next morning, Richard was surprised by a court notification. The Mendez had obtained a restraining order against him, alleging harassment and disturbance of the peace. The document prohibited him from approaching the mansion or attempting any contact with Lily. "They're covering all the bases," his lawyer explained, examining the papers. "It's a smart move. Now, if you try anything, you could be arrested." Richard ran a hand across his face, exhausted. He hadn't slept properly for days, consumed by worry for Lily. "There must be something we can do, some legal loophole." "We're trying," the lawyer replied, "but they have an impeccable record. On paper, all the previous adoptions seem perfectly legal. The transfers of the children were documented, even if we know they're fake." That afternoon, while trying to focus on work, Richard received a call from Pete. "Chief, there's strange activity at the mansion. Several people coming and going carrying papers." "What kind of papers?" "They look like medical documents. And I saw a man arrive who we identified as a doctor. Dr. Silvera. We did a quick search. He's already signed reports for the Mendes in the other adoptions." Richard felt a pang in his chest. It was the same pattern. They got false medical reports to justify the transfer of children to supposed specialized treatments. "We need concrete evidence," Richard murmured, more to himself than to Pete. "Something they can't deny or cover up." That's when he had an idea. "Pete, that former employee, Maria, does she still have contact with anyone who works at the mansion?" "I'll check," Pete replied. "Why?" "Because we need eyes and ears in there. Someone who can warn us when they plan to do something with Lily." The following hours were of intense coordination. Maria was still friends with one of the cleaning ladies at the mansion, Zephyr, who agreed to help. The woman, who had also witnessed the suffering of the other children, couldn't bear to see Lily go through the same situation. "The girl doesn't stop crying," Zephyr reported by phone, her voice choked up. "She barely eats. Mrs. Regina ordered all the windows in the room locked after she saw her waving to you." Through Zephyr, Richard discovered that Lily was increasingly isolated. Regina forbade any employee from spending more time than necessary in the girl's room. The food was left at the door, and only a nurse's aide, hired by the Mendes, was authorized to enter. "This nurse is weird," Zephyr commented. "She keeps giving the girl medicine to sleep. The other day I heard Lily crying, saying she was dizzy, that she didn't want to take the medicine anymore." The information chilled Richard to the bone. They were drugging Lily to keep her quiet and controlled. Her vision was almost completely impaired, and the drugs only worsened her condition. One night, Zephyr called in panic, "Mr. Lucas, something happened. The girl tried to escape." "What do you mean?" Richard sat straight in his chair, alarmed. "She managed to get out of the room when the nurse went to get more medicine. She went down the stairs, feeling the wall, calling for you." Mrs. Regina was furious. Richard felt his heart tighten as he imagined Lily, practically blind, desperately, trying to find a way out of that place. What did they do to her? "The nurse gave her an injection to make her sleep," Zephyr replied, her voice trembling. "But before that, I overheard Mrs. Regina on the phone. She was talking to the doctor, saying they needed to speed things up, that the girl was being too much trouble." That same night, Pete confirmed that the Mendes had received a considerable amount of money from a government program supporting children with disabilities. The money, supposedly intended for Lily's treatment, had already been transferred to one of the couple's offshore accounts. "They're going to move soon," Pete warned, "following the pattern of the other children. As soon as they get the money." Richard couldn't sleep. He stayed in his office, looking out the window, feeling helpless. Somewhere in that city, a scared little girl was calling for him, lost in the darkness that was now both physical and emotional. The next morning, Zephyr called again. Her voice was different, filled with fear. "Mr. Lucas, I overheard Mr. Fernando talking to the nurse. They're planning to take the girl away tonight. I've seen this before with the other children. They wait for everyone to fall asleep." Richard felt his blood run cold. "Are you sure?" I'm sure. Her voice trembled. They're arranging documents, talking about a clinic in another state. But it's a lie. They're going to do to her what they did to the others. There was no more time to lose. Richard knew he had to act, even if it meant facing the legal consequences of the restraining order. He couldn't allow Lily to disappear like the other children. Pete, he called his investigator, gather all the evidence we have, every document, every recording, every testimony. We're going to end this today. What Richard didn't know was that the Mendes also had their own plans for that night, and they would do anything to ensure that no one interfered with their scheme, even if it meant taking even more drastic measures. Night fell over the city as Richard finalized the last preparations. In his office, a folder contained all the carefully organized evidence, financial documents showing the suspicious transfers, recorded testimonies from Maria and Zephyr, photos of the previously adopted children, questionable medical reports signed by Dr. Silvera. Are the cameras in position? He asked Pete over the phone. Yes, Chief. We have a view of all angles of the mansion. If they try to take Lily out of there, we'll record everything. Richard looked at the clock. Almost 8 in the evening. According to Zephyr, the Mendes usually made their transfers after midnight, when the neighborhood was quieter and there was less traffic on the streets. A knock on his door startled him. It was Maria, the former cook, her face etched with worry. Mr. Lucas, she said, wringing her hands nervously. Zephyr just called me. The nurse is preparing a larger dose of medicine for Lily. They say it's to make her stay calm during the trip. Richard felt his stomach churn. He knew that the medicines they were giving the girl were too strong, probably even dangerous for a child of her age. How is Lily? He asked, dreading the answer. Bad, Maria replied, tears in her eyes. Zephyr said she's very weak. She barely eats for days. She only sleeps because of the medicine. When she's awake, she calls for you. The pain in Richard's chest increased. He thought of Bernard, of his promise to take care of Lily. He was failing both of them. His phone rang again. It was his lawyer. Richard, I got something. A judge on duty agreed to analyze the evidence we gathered. If we can prove that the Mendes are planning to remove Lily illegally tonight. How long does he need? Richard interrupted anxiously. A few hours. We need to be absolutely sure. Irrefutable evidence. If we act rashly, they can escape through some legal loophole. Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. A few hours could be too long. If the Mendes managed to take Lily out of the mansion, it would be practically impossible to track her down later. At that moment, Pete rushed into his office. Chief, movement at the mansion. A car with tinted windows just arrived. Dr. Silvera got out with a medical bag. Richard felt his blood run cold. It was the same doctor who had signed the false reports. For the other children, his presence could only mean one thing. They were advancing their plans. The nurse is packing a suitcase, Pete continued, reading the messages that arrived on his cell phone. Zephyr says there are Lily's clothes inside. There was no more time to wait for the judge. Richard grabbed his coat and car keys. Pete, continue monitoring. Any movement, let me know. Maria, call Zephyr. Tell her to try and stall them somehow. What are you going to do? Pete asked, worried. The restraining order. It doesn't matter, Richard replied, already heading for the door. I'm not going to let that girl disappear like the others. While driving through the city, Richard tried to stay calm. He needed to think clearly, act intelligently. The Mendes were powerful and cunning. Any mistake could cost not only his freedom, but mainly Lily's future. His cell phone rang. It was Zephyr, her voice trembling with fear. Mr. Lucas, the nurse already gave Lily the medicine. The girl is sleeping. I heard them saying they're going to take her as soon as the doctor finishes preparing the documents. How much time do we have? Not much, she replied. Mr. Fernando is in the office with the doctor, signing papers. Mrs. Regina is supervising the nurse packing things. Richard sped up, his heart beating erratically. The Mendes mansion was at least 20 minutes away, even at that time of night. "Zephyr," he asked, "I need you to do something for me. Find a way to delay them. Anything. I'll try," she promised. "But be careful, Mr. Lucas. They are dangerous people." She had barely finished speaking when Richard heard raised voices in the background, followed by a noise of things falling. "What was that?" he asked, alarmed. "The dinner tray," Zephyr replied, a touch of cunning in her voice. "I accidentally dropped it on the stairs. It made a mess. I'll have to clean everything before anyone can pass through there." Richard couldn't help but smile a little. That simple woman was risking her job to help Lily. Closer to the mansion, he parked the car a few blocks before, where Pete had positioned a surveillance van. The cameras showed movement inside the house, shadows passing through the windows, lights being turned on and off. "The nurse went up to Lily's room," Pete narrated, watching the monitors. "She's carrying something, looks like a foldable stretcher." Richard felt his heart skip a beat. They were going to take Lily completely sedated, as if she were a patient being legitimately transferred to another hospital. "Dr. Silvera's car is positioned in the back garage," Pete continued, "away from the eyes of the neighbors." At that moment, Richard's phone vibrated with a message from his lawyer. "Judge, analyzing the evidence. We need 30 more minutes." Richard looked at the monitors again. The nurse was returning to Lily's room, now accompanied by Fernando Mendez. They didn't have 30 minutes. "Pete," he said, getting up, "keep recording everything. If something goes wrong—" "Chief," Pete interrupted him, worried, "if they catch you violating the restraining order, you can be arrested. They will use it against you." "I don't care," Richard replied, already leaving the van. "I promised her father that I would protect her, and that's what I'm going to do." The night was silent as he approached the mansion. Each step could mean his ruin, or the salvation of a little girl who had already lost too much in life. Richard circled the mansion silently, avoiding the lit areas. His heart was beating so hard that it seemed like everyone could hear it. Years negotiating on Wall Street hadn't prepared him for this type of situation. The adrenaline rushing through his veins was different from anything he had ever experienced. Zephyr had left a side door unlocked, as agreed. Even so, Richard hesitated. Before entering, once inside the house, there would be no turning back. Any mistake could not only result in his arrest, but mainly permanently harm his chances of helping Lily. His cell phone vibrated, a message from Pete. "Nurse left the room. She's going downstairs to get more equipment in the garage." It was his chance. Richard entered, his expensive shoes making as little noise as possible on the marble floor. He knew the way to Lily's room from the last time he was there. Downstairs, he could hear voices coming from the office. Fernando and Dr. Silvera still discussing the details of the transfer. As he climbed the stairs, he almost ran into Regina, who was leaving one of the rooms. By reflex, he hid behind a decorative column, his heart almost stopping. Regina passed less than a meter from him, her expensive perfume leaving a trail in the air as she spoke on the phone. "Yes, everything is prepared. The girl is already sedated. No, there will be no problems this time. We learned from previous mistakes." When she went downstairs, Richard released the breath he hadn't even realized he was holding. He continued his way until he found the door to Lily's room. It was unlocked, which was strange. Upon entering, he understood why. There was no need to lock up a completely sedated child. Lily was lying on the bed, much too big for her fragile frame. Her little face, normally so expressive, was pale and still. Richard approached, touching her small hand. It was cold. "Lily," he called softly, caressing her hair. "Little one, can you hear me?" The girl didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. The medicines they had given her were clearly too strong for a child. Richard checked her pulse. It was weak, but regular. Carefully, he tried to wake her, but she just mumbled something unintelligible and remained unconscious. His cell phone vibrated again. Another message from Pete. "Nurse returning. Dr. Silvera finishing the documents. They're going to start the transfer in 10 minutes. There was no time to lose. Richard needed to get Lily out of there before they came back. But how to carry an unconscious child out of the house without being seen? That's when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Quick and silent, he hid inside the closet, leaving a small crack to observe. The nurse entered, carrying a foldable stretcher and a bag with medical equipment. Regina followed her closely. "Prepare everything," Regina ordered. "Fernando and the doctor are almost done with the documents. It needs to look like a legitimate transfer in case any neighbors see us." "The dose I gave was strong," the nurse commented, setting up the stretcher. "She won't wake up anytime soon." Regina gave a cold smile. "Great. We don't need another show like last time. That pathetic escape attempt of hers almost cost us everything." From his hiding place, Richard felt his blood boil. How could they talk about a child with such indifference? "What about Richard Lucas?" the nurse asked, checking Lily's vital signs. "He won't give up easily." "That sentimental fool isn't a problem," Regina replied with disdain. "The restraining order keeps him away, and after today, he'll never find her again." Richard clenched his fists, controlling the urge to leave the closet and confront them. He needed to wait for the right moment. "Mrs. Mendez," Zephyr's voice sounded from the door, breathless. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a serious problem in the kitchen. A pipe burst. It's flooding everything." Regina cursed under her breath. "Take care of her," she ordered the nurse. "I'll be back in a minute." As soon as Regina left, the nurse began to prepare a syringe. Richard watched, tense, through the crack. What else did they intend to give Lily? That's when his cell phone. It vibrated very loudly in the silence of the closet. The nurse froze. "Is someone there?" Richard knew he had lost the element of surprise. He came out of the closet quickly, startling the nurse who dropped the syringe. "Stay away from her," he ordered, his voice low but firm. "You can't be here." The nurse took a step back. "The restraining order." "I said stay away," Richard repeated, approaching the bed where Lily lay unconscious. The nurse seemed panicked. "Mrs. Mendez!" she began to scream. "Mrs. Reggie." Before she could finish, Zephyr appeared in the door and, with a surprising agility for her age, covered the nurse's mouth with a cloth. "Quick, Mr. Lucas," the woman whispered, still holding the struggling nurse. "Mrs. Regina must have realized that there is no burst pipe." Richard didn't waste time. Carefully, he picked Lily up in his arms. She was so light, so fragile. Her little face rested on his shoulder, her breathing still shallow because of the sedatives. "Zephyr, let her scream," he said, already heading for the door. "I don't want you to get into more trouble." "Go," the woman insisted. "This girl has suffered enough. I'll deal with them later." Richard carried Lily through the hall, his heart pounding erratically. He could hear raised voices downstairs. Regina was probably already returning. He had just reached the stairs when he heard the nurse's scream echoing through the house. "They're escaping! The girl!" "Richard Lucas!" Regina's voice thundered from the foot of the stairs. "What do you think you're doing?" He pressed Lily against his chest, protective. "Preventing you from destroying another innocent life." Fernando appeared next to his wife, his face red with anger. "Put the girl down now. You are violating a court order." "No," Richard replied, his voice filled with a calm he didn't feel. "You are the ones violating all possible laws, and this ends today." At that moment, sirens began to sound outside the mansion. Red and blue lights illuminated the windows. The voice of his lawyer sounded through a loudspeaker. "Fernando and Regina Mendez, the house is surrounded. We have a court order to prevent the illegal transfer of the minor Lily. Come out with your hands up." Regina's face lost all color at The sound of the sirens. Fernando began to sweat, his small eyes darting frantically between Richard and the windows, illuminated by the police lights. This is outrageous. Regina tried to maintain her composure, but her voice trembled. We have legal custody of Lily. You can't just break into our house. Richard descended the stairs slowly, still carrying Lily. The girl hadn't moved, completely oblivious to the chaos around her due to the strong sedatives. Legal custody? He questioned, his voice filled with contempt. Like the one you had. Of the other children? Marina, Peter, Ana Luisa. Fernando took a step forward, menacing. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything. Richard interrupted him. Every detail of your disgusting scheme. How you choose children with special needs, do the whole theater of loving adoption, receive fortunes in benefits, and then simply discard them. Regina let out a forced laugh, but her eyes showed panic. That's absurd. We have a reputation. We are known for our social work, a very convenient facade. Richard continued, perfect to hide the truth, but you know what you didn't count on, that some people have a conscience, like Maria, your former cook, like Zephyr, the woman who watched everything from the top of the stairs, straightened her posture when mentioned. That gossiping old woman, Regina hissed, always sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. She saw what you did with the other children, Richard continued. How you took them away at night, how you forged transfer documents. Dr. Silvera, who until then watched the scene in silence from the corner of the room, began to move discreetly towards the back door. Don't even think about it, Doctor. Pete's voice sounded from the kitchen entrance, where he had entered silently. All exits are blocked, and we have some questions about certain medical reports that you signed. The doctor stopped, defeated. His face was white as a sheet. This is persecution. Fernando tried one last card. We'll sue all of you. We have influence. We know important people. You used to know, Richard corrected, because all those important people are already aware of your scheme. In fact, at this very moment, other teams are visiting your contacts. In the adoption system, it's amazing how cooperative people get when they find out they can be linked to a criminal scheme. Regina staggered, needing to lean on the wall. All her pose of elegant socialite had collapsed. You can't prove anything, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Richard adjusted Lily in his arms. The girl was finally starting to move, the effects of the sedatives slowly diminishing. No, he asked. What about the financial documents showing the suspicious transfers to offshore accounts, the falsified medical reports, the testimonies of the witnesses, the recordings of your own conversations about how you were going to get rid of Lily tonight? Fernando, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes, fell heavily on the sofa. It was her idea, he murmured, pointing to Regina. The whole scheme, she planned everything. Regina turned to her husband, shocked by the betrayal. You coward! You were there in every adoption, signed all the documents, received your share of the money. The two began a heated argument, accusing each other, exposing even more details of the criminal scheme. Pete discreetly recorded everything with his cell phone. It was at that moment that Lily began to awaken. Her little eyes, which now barely distinguished light and shadow, opened confused. Mr. Richard, she murmured, her voice weak. Is that really you? Yes, little one, he replied, tears escaping his eyes. It's me. You're safe now. The girl tried to snuggle closer in his arms, but the medicine still made her groggy. Don't leave me anymore, okay? I was so scared. Never again, he promised, kissing her forehead. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. At that moment, the doors of the mansion opened. Law enforcement officers and social workers entered, accompanied by the judge on duty who had authorized the operation. His look was stern as he observed the scene. Mrs. Regina Mendez. Mr. Fernando Mendez. One of the officers began to read a document. You are being officially removed from the custody of the minor Lily, and you will be prosecuted for fraud, neglect, abuse, and various other crimes. Regina began to scream, needing to be restrained. Fernando remained on the sofa, seeming to wither with each new accusation read. Dr. Silvera was taken to testify about his participation in the scheme. The nurse, trembling, confessed that she was following orders from the Mendez to keep Lily sedated. Zephyr approached Richard and Lily, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "It's finally over," she said, caressing the girl's hair. "This child will finally have peace," but there was still a long way ahead. Lily would need a lot of love, patience, and care to overcome the trauma of what she had been through. Her vision was practically lost, and the effects of the medicines they had forced her to take still needed to be evaluated. Richard knew it wouldn't be easy, but looking at the little one asleep in his arms, he was sure he would do anything to see her smile again. He had promised Bernard that he would take care of his daughter, and now, finally, he could fulfill that promise. The days that followed were intense. Richard completely transformed his life to take care of Lily. His penthouse apartment, previously a minimalist and cold environment, gained special adaptations for a child with visual impairment. The walls received different textures to help her locate herself. The furniture was rearranged to create safe paths, and each room gained a specific scent to facilitate her orientation. But the physical changes were just the beginning. The little one needed constant medical follow-up to recover from the effects of the sedatives that the Mendez had forced her to take. Her fragile body was debilitated, and the doctors discovered that the drugs had further accelerated the process of vision loss. "She will need a lot of support," explained Dr. Lane, the ophthalmologist who started following Lily. The emotional trauma, added to the inadequate medication, significantly affected her nervous system. Total blindness is inevitable now, and it can happen at any moment. Richard listened to everything with a heavy heart, watching Lily sleeping in the hospital bed during one of the exams. She still had frequent nightmares, woke up crying in the middle of the night calling for him, fearing she had been abandoned. Again. "Mr. Richard," she asked one night after waking up startled, "are you still here?" "Yes, little one," he replied, sitting on the edge of her bed and holding her hand, "and I will always be." "But Mrs. Regina also said she was going to take care of me," Lily murmured, her voice trembling. "And then she would get angry when I couldn't do things right, when I dropped things because I couldn't see." Richard felt his heart break. "Lily, look, or rather listen," he corrected himself gently. "What happened at the Mendez house was very wrong. They were bad people who hurt you and other children, but it's over. They will never get close to you again." The girl squeezed his hand. "Promise." "I promise," he replied firmly. "Now we are a family, you and I." Gradually, with much love and patience, Lily began to recover. Zephyr, who had been instrumental in saving her, began working at Richard's house, helping to care for the girl. Her familiar and loving presence was a great comfort to Lily. "You know, Mr. Richard," Zephyr commented one day while helping Lily familiarize herself with the new arrangement of furniture, "I never thought I'd see you like this. So different." "Different how?" he asked, watching the interaction between the two. "More human," she replied with a smile. "Before, you were all right, always running, just thinking about work and money. Now you smile more. You even sing with the girl." Richard laughed, realizing that she was right. His priorities had changed completely. The stock market, which once consumed all his hours, now occupied only a small part of his day. His time was dedicated to Lily, to accompany her in therapy sessions, to learn Braille along with her, to discover new ways to make her smile. One afternoon, while playing in the building's garden, Lily surprised Richard with a question. "Mr. Richard, do you think my daddy would be sad to see me like this? Not seeing anything?" Richard swallowed the lump that formed in his throat. "No, little one, your daddy would be very proud to see how strong and brave you are. You know, he made me promise that I would take care of you." "Really?" she asked, her little face lighting up. "Yes, and I intend to fulfill that promise every day." Lily smiled, that pure smile that made Richard's heart melt. "So now you're my daddy too?" The question caught him by surprise, moving him deeply. "If you want me to be, I do," she replied, extending her arms towards his voice. "Can I call you Dad?" Richard hugged her, tears streaming down his face. "You can, my little one. You can." Meanwhile, the case against the Mendes was progressing. Investigations revealed an even larger network of fraud and irregular adoptions. All the children were located, some in precarious situations, and began to receive the help they needed. Maria, the former cook, and Zephyr gave detailed testimonies about everything they had witnessed at the mansion. Dr. Silvera, pressured, ended up confessing his participation in the scheme, providing evidence that further incriminated the couple. Regina and Fernando Mendes, who had always considered themselves untouchable, saw their empire of appearances crumble. Their connections abandoned them, their influential friends disappeared, and they now faced a long list of charges. "How could they?" Pete asked one day, reviewing the case documents. "How can someone be so cruel to innocent children?" "Greed," Richard replied, watching Lily play with her new adapted toys. "They only saw numbers, profits. They weren't able to see what I see now." "And what is that?" "That every smile of that girl is worth more than all the fortune in the world." The adaptation was not easy. There were difficult days when Lily was frustrated with her limitations, when she cried in fear of the darkness that was now her constant world. But Richard was always there, patient, present, learning along with her to face each challenge. He hired the best special education specialists, invested in assistive technologies, transformed his home into an environment where Lily could develop safely and autonomously. But above all, he gave her what the Mendes were never able to offer: true and unconditional love. "Dad?" Lily called one night, after a particularly difficult physical therapy session. "Do you think I'll ever be able to do everything by myself?" "I'm sure you will," he replied, sitting next to her. "But even when you do, I'll always be around. You know why? Why? Because now we are a real family, and family never abandons family." Lily smiled, that smile that illuminated the entire environment. "Even without seeing, I can see that you really love me," she said. "I feel it here," and she put her little hand on her heart. Richard realized that his little one was right. Sometimes the truest love doesn't need to be seen. It can be felt even in the deepest darkness. The months passed, and Richard and Lily's life found a new rhythm. The routine of the house now revolved around the girls' needs and discoveries. The mornings started early, with physical therapy sessions and braille lessons. The afternoons were dedicated to activities that stimulated her other senses: music, clay, stories told in audio. Zephyr continued to be a constant and loving presence, helping not only with Lily's care, but also teaching Richard about the little things that make a house really work. "You need to learn to cook right," she insisted. "You can't just keep ordering takeout. The girl needs homemade food, made with love." And so, in his spare time, Richard found himself learning to make simple dishes under the strict supervision of the woman. Lily loved these moments, sitting at the kitchen table, participating in the conversations, and occasionally tasting her father's culinary attempts. "It's getting better," she said diplomatically when something didn't turn out so well, making Zephyr laugh. "This girl is too polite to say that the rice is soggy again," the woman teased, making Richard laugh too. It was during one of these relaxed moments that the phone rang. It was Richard's lawyer with news about the Mendez trial. "The trial has been scheduled," he informed, "but there is a delicate issue. Lily will need to testify." Richard felt his heart clench. The girl had progressed so much in recent months. She was more confident, more cheerful. The idea of making her relive those traumatic moments frightened him. "Is there no other way?" he asked, watching Lily, who was playing with modeling clay, completely oblivious to the conversation. "Unfortunately not," the lawyer replied. "Her testimony is crucial. The Mendez are trying to claim that they always treated the children they adopted well, that the transfers were legitimate." That night, after Lily fell asleep, Richard talked to Zephyr about the situation. "You need to prepare her," the woman advised. "You can't let her be caught off guard, but you also need to show that you are on her side, that you will protect her." The next day, Richard took Lily for a walk in the park that she loved so much, sitting on a bench, feeling the morning. "Son," he tried to approach the subject in the gentlest way possible. "Honey, I need to tell you something important," he began, holding her small hand. "Remember when we talked about bad people having to pay for what they did?" Lily became tense immediately. "Mrs. Regina and Mr. Fernando?" "Yes," he replied gently. "They will be judged for what they did, and the judges need to hear you tell what happened when you were at their house." The girl squeezed his hand tightly. "Do I have to see them again?" "No, little one. You won't even need to be in the same room as them. I'll be with you the whole time, and you just need to tell the truth." Lily was silent for a moment, her little face as concentrated as she always got when she was processing something difficult. "And if they try to take me again?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. Richard hugged her tightly. "That will never happen. They will never get near you. Again, I promise." In the weeks leading up to the trial, Richard worked with a specialized psychologist to prepare Lily. The girl demonstrated surprising strength, gradually recalling the difficult moments she had gone through. "They didn't let anyone play with me," she said during one of the sessions. "They said I was clumsy, that I broke everything, but it was because I couldn't see properly and no one helped me." The psychologist carefully documented each account, noting how Lily clung to Richard's hand whenever the memories became more difficult. Maria, the former cook, and Zephyr would also be important witnesses. The two women visited frequently, bringing not only crucial information for the process, but also a lot of love to Lily. "Did you see the other children?" Lily asked one day, surprising everyone. "The ones who were there before me?" Maria and Zephyr exchanged emotional glances. "Yes, dear," Maria replied, "and now they are being helped, like you." Pete continued investigating, following leads about other possible victims of the Mendez. His work had turned into a personal mission. He would not rest until all the children affected by the scheme were found and received the necessary help. "We have already located 3 more, he informed during one of his visits. All in precarious situations, needing treatments that the Mendez promised but never provided. The day of the trial finally arrived. Richard had prepared Lily with all care, explaining every detail of what would happen. The girl wore a new dress, chosen especially for the occasion, and her hair had been carefully styled by Zephyr. "You look beautiful," Richard said, helping her settle into the chair in the special courtroom room where she would give her testimony by video conference. "Dad," she called, holding his hand before he walked away. "Stay close to me." "Always, my little one. Always." Lily's testimony was strong and clear. Even without being able to see, she accurately described the mistreatment she suffered, the forced medications, the isolation, the constant fear. Her childish voice, filled with truth, echoed through the courtroom, touching even the most hardened hearts. Regina and Fernando Mendes, sitting in the dock, seemed to wither with each word of the girl. Their empire of lies crumbled before the pure testimony of a child they had tried to silence. "And now?" Lily asked after everything was over, exhausted but relieved. "They won't hurt anyone anymore?" "No, honey," Richard replied, hugging her. "Thanks to you, they won't be able to hurt any child." That night at home, there was a small celebration. Zifa prepared all of Lily's favorite dishes. Maria brought a special cake, and even Pete showed up with a gift, a guide dog specially trained to help her. "He will be your eyes when you need it," he explained, as the puppy licked Lily's face, making her laugh. "Can I call him Valor?" she asked, caressing the animal's soft fur. "You can call him whatever you want," Richard replied, watching the scene with a full heart. "He's yours." Later, after everyone had left and Lily slept peacefully in her bed, with Valor lying next to her, Richard sat in his office, mentally reviewing everything that had happened in recent months. His life had changed completely since that afternoon, when he saw a little girl on the edge of the bridge. The cold and calculating executive had given way to a loving and dedicated father. Money and success, which were once his only measure of value, now seemed so small in the face of his daughter's smile. "Thank you, Bernard," he murmured to the silence of the night. "Thank you for entrusting your most precious treasure to me." In her room, Lily slept soundly for the first time in a long time. Her dreams were no longer haunted by fears and abandonment. Now she dreamed of colors that her memory still held, with the love of her father Bernard, and with the new love she had found in Richard. The darkness that once frightened her so much had turned into just another part of who she was. Not a limit, but a new way of perceiving the world. A world that, thanks to the love of her new family, was full of possibilities. The Mendes trial stretched over several weeks. Each day brought new revelations about the extent of their crimes. Other families began to come forward, reporting similar experiences with the couple. The scheme was even larger than they initially imagined. Regina, who had always maintained a haughty posture, began to show signs of despair as the evidence accumulated against her. Fernando, on the other hand, decided to cooperate with the investigations in exchange for a possible reduction in sentence. "She was the mastermind of everything," he revealed during one of his testimonies. "She chose the children carefully, always the most vulnerable. The more complex the treatment needed, the more money we got in benefits." Richard followed the process closely, but kept Lily protected from all the heavier details. The girl had already done her part. Now it was time to move on, and she was progressing admirably. With the help of Valor, her guide dog, Lily was beginning to regain her independence. The animal was incredibly dedicated, always attentive to her every movement. In the words of the trainer who trained him, it was as if he had been born for this specific mission. "Look, Dad," Lily called one morning, radiant. "I managed to make the whole way from the room to the kitchen alone, only with Valor guiding me." Richard, who was watching discreetly, felt his eyes water. Each small achievement of hers was a huge victory for him. "Well done, my little one." He hugged her proud. "Soon you'll be running around the whole house." Zephyr, who was preparing breakfast, smiled at the scene. "This girl is stronger than many adults out there," she commented, putting pancakes on the table. "And Valor doesn't let her take a wrong step." The dog, hearing his name, wagged his tail and rested his head on Lily's lap, making her laugh. It was impressive how he knew exactly when she needed support or affection. The therapy sessions continued, but now focused more on the development of her skills than on the trauma of the past. Lily learned Braille with surprising speed, and her music lessons became the most anticipated moment of the week. "She has a natural talent," commented her piano teacher. "It's like her fingers know exactly where to go, even without seeing the keys." Richard had bought a piano especially for her, after noticing how the girl was interested in music. The instrument occupied a prominent place in the room, and every night Lily practiced a little, filling the house with melodies that seemed to translate her feelings. "When I play," she explained once, "it's like I can see with my fingers. Each note has a different color in my head." Maria and Zephyr were constant presences in this new phase. The two women had become a fundamental part of the family, bringing not only practical help, but mainly a lot of love and wisdom. "You know, Mr. Richard," Maria commented one day while helping to prepare a cake for the snack, "I never thought I'd see anything good come out of that terrible story with the Mendes. But look what a beautiful family you have formed." It was true. What had started with a tragedy had turned into something precious. The house, once so silent and cold, now overflowed with life. Lily's laughter, Vala's joyful barks, the animated conversations during meals, all this created an atmosphere of love that Richard had never imagined possible in his life. Pete also became a frequent visitor. The investigator, who was previously just a service provider, was now considered a close friend, almost an uncle to Lily. He always brought news about the other children who had been victims of the Mendes. "Marina is doing very well," he said during one of his Sunday lunches at the house. "The family that took her in is wonderful. She's getting all the treatment she needs. And Ana Luisa finally got a kidney transplant." Lily always wanted to know the news about these children, who, even without knowing personally, considered in some way connected to her. "And Peter?" she asked, referring to the boy who had not yet been found. A heavy silence fell over the table. Pete cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "Not yet, little one, but we won't give up looking." The investigations continued, revealing more and more ramifications of the Mendes scheme. It was discovered that they did not act alone. There was a network of people who facilitated fraudulent adoptions, from record office employees to corrupt social workers. "It's like a spider web," explained the prosecutor of the case during a meeting with Richard. "We pull a thread and discover 10 more connections, but we are dismantling everything, person by person." Regina and Fernando were finally convicted. The sentences were heavy: years in prison, astronomical fines, compensation for all the affected families. But for Richard, the greatest victory was not the punishment of the culprits, but seeing Lily flourish, free from the fear and insecurity they had planted in her. "Dad," she called one night after her piano performance at school, "do you think one day I'll be able to help other kids like me?" Richard, who was still moved by her performance, smiled. "What do you mean, little one? You know, kids who can't see or who lost their parents. I wanted to show them that you can be happy even when life gets difficult." He hugged her, feeling his heart overflow with pride. His little Lily, who had gone through so much suffering, was already thinking about how to help others. "I'm sure you're going to help a lot of people, honey," he replied. "You're already doing it, you know. Your story has inspired many people to look more closely at special needs children." It was true. The case had gained repercussion, drawing attention to the need for greater oversight in the adoption processes, especially involving children with special needs. New laws were being proposed. More rigorous monitoring systems were being implemented. "Good always wins, doesn't it, Dad?" Lily asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "It does, my little one," he replied, thinking about how his life had changed completely since that little girl had entered it. "It takes a while sometimes, but love always finds a way." Vala, lying at their feet, raised his head and let out a soft bark as if agreeing. Lily laughed, that crystal-clear laughter that was music to Richard's ears. The night was calm, and a soft breeze entered through the window of the room. Richard looked at his daughter, at the faithful dog by her side, thought about all the family. They had built Zephyr, Maria, Pete, and felt a deep peace. The path had not been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But now they had something that no one could take away, a true love, built not in blood, but in the daily choices to stay united and strong, whatever happened. A year had passed since the Mendes trial. Richard and Lily's life found a quiet balance, built day after day with much love and dedication. The girl, now 6 years old, surprised everyone with her strength and determination. Her piano lessons became more than a hobby. They were a form of expression that compensated for the lack of vision. Her small fingers danced on the keys with extraordinary sensitivity, creating melodies that moved anyone who heard her. "She has a gift," commented her teacher during one of the performances at school. "It's like music is her eyes now." Richard watched proudly as Lily played, her little face concentrated, completely immersed in the music. Valor, as always, remained, lying next to the piano, attentive to her every movement. At home, the routine was peaceful and welcoming. Zephyr continued to be the heart of the house, filling the rooms with delicious smells of homemade food and unconditional love. Maria visited almost every day, always bringing some surprise for Lily, a special candy, a new story, a small gift that the girl could see with her hands. "You know, Mr. Richard," Zephyr commented one morning while preparing coffee, "sometimes I keep thinking about how God writes straight with crooked lines." "What do you mean?" he asked, helping to set the table, a task that he previously delegated to employees, but that he now made a point of participating in. "Look at it, that terrible story with the Mendes, all that evil, and in the end it brought so much good. You found a daughter, Lily gained a real dad, and we all became a family." Richard smiled, thinking about how his life had changed. The workaholic executive, who lived only for business, had given way to a present and loving father. His agenda, previously full of meetings and professional commitments, was now organized around Lily's needs. The mornings started early with the ritual of family breakfast. Richard made a point of taking Lily personally to the specialized school where she studied. On the way, they always talked about everything, their dreams, their fears, their discoveries. "Dad," she asked during one of these trips, "do you think one day I'll be able to be a music teacher?" "Of course, little one," he replied, smiling at her enthusiasm. "You can be whatever you want, even without seeing. Music doesn't need eyes to be felt, remember? You yourself taught me that." Lily's school was a welcoming environment, specializing in children with visual impairments. There, she was not different. She was just another student learning to explore the world in her own way. The Mendes trial extended for several weeks. Each day brought new revelations about the extent of their crimes. Other families began to come forward, reporting similar experiences with the couple. The scheme was even larger than they initially imagined. Regina, who had always maintained a haughty posture, began to show signs of despair as the evidence accumulated against her. Fernando, on the other hand, decided to cooperate with the investigations in exchange for a possible reduction in sentence. "She was the mastermind of everything," he revealed during one of his testimonies. "She chose the children carefully, always the most vulnerable. The more complex the treatment needed, the more money we got in benefits." Richard followed the process closely, but kept Lily protected from all the heavier details. The girl had already done her part, now it was time to move on, and she was progressing admirably. With the help of Valor, her guide dog, Lily was beginning to regain her independence. The animal was incredibly dedicated, always attentive to her every movement. In the words of the trainer who trained him, it was as if he had been born for this specific mission. "Look, Dad," Lily called one morning, radiant. "I managed to make the whole way from the room to the kitchen alone, only with Valor guiding me." Richard, who was watching discreetly, felt his eyes water. Each small achievement of hers was a huge victory for him. "Well done, my little one," he hugged her proud. "Soon you'll be running around the whole house." Zephyr, who was preparing breakfast, smiled at the scene. "This girl is stronger than many adults out there," she commented, putting pancakes on the table. "And valor doesn't let her take a wrong step." The dog, hearing his name, wagged his tail and rested his head on Lily's lap, making her laugh. It was impressive how he knew exactly when she needed support or affection. The therapy sessions continued, but now focused more on the development of her skills than on the trauma of the past. Lily learned Braille with surprising speed, and her music lessons became the most anticipated moment of the week. "She has a natural talent," commented her piano teacher. "It's like her fingers know exactly where to go, even without seeing the keys." Richard had bought a piano especially for her, after noticing how the girl was interested in music. The instrument occupied a prominent place in the room, and every night Lily practiced a little, filling the house with melodies that seemed to translate her feelings. "When I play," she explained once, "it's like I can see with my fingers. Each note has a different color in my head." Maria and Zephyr were constant presences in this new phase. The two women had become a fundamental part of the family, bringing not only practical help, but mainly a lot of love and wisdom. "You know, Mr. Richard," Maria commented one day, while helping to prepare a cake for the snack, "I never thought I'd see anything good come out of that terrible story with the Mendez. But look what a beautiful family you have formed." It was true. What had started with a tragedy had turned into something precious. The house, once so silent and cold, now overflowed with life. Lily's laughter, Vala's joyful barks, the animated conversations during meals, all this created an atmosphere of love that Richard had never imagined possible in his life. Pete also became a frequent visitor. The investigator, who was previously just a service provider, was now considered a close friend, almost an uncle to Lily. He always brought news about the other children who had been victims of the Mendez. "Marina is doing very well," he said during one of his Sunday lunches at the house. "The family that took her in is wonderful. She's getting all the treatment she needs. And Ana Luisa finally got a kidney transplant." Lily always wanted to know the news about these children who, even without knowing personally, considered in some way connected to her. "And Peter?" she asked, referring to the boy who was still missing. A heavy silence fell over the table. Pete hesitated before answering. "Not yet, little one, but we haven't given up." Lily was thoughtful for a moment, her fingers playing with the fur of Vala, who never left her side. "You know, Dad," she said finally, "I think I know how we can help find him and other children who need help." "How, honey?" "We could do a project, use music to help kids like me. The teacher said that music heals the soul. Maybe if we do shows, tell our story." Richard felt his heart fill with pride. His little Lily, who had gone through so much suffering, only thought about how to help others. The idea grew quickly. With the help of Pete and the lawyers, they created a foundation focused on helping children with special needs. The project started small, with Lily's performances in hospitals and foster homes. "It's amazing," commented Maria after one of these performances, "seeing how the children connect with her, how they feel less alone." The foundation also established a monitoring system for suspicious adoptions, working together with authorities to prevent other children from going through what Lily had gone through. At home, life continued its sweet and quiet course. Richard had learned to better balance his work with family life. He still managed his investments, but now a large part of his resources was directed to social causes, especially those linked to special needs children. Zephyr, who at first thought she would stay temporarily, had become a permanent part of the family. Her room in the house was her special corner, decorated with photos of Lily and memories of the happy moments they shared. "I never thought I would have a family like this," she commented one night while knitting in the living room. "You and Lily are like son and granddaughter to me." Lily, who was practicing piano nearby, stopped playing and smiled. "And you're our Grandma Zephyr," she said fondly. "The best grandma in the world." The nights were especially precious. After dinner, which always brought the family together, including Maria when she could, and Pete on weekends, Richard and Lily had their special moment. They sat on the porch, Vala lying at their feet, and talked about the day. "Dad," Lily called during one of these conversations, "do you think my dad Bernard would be happy to see me now?" Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. "I'm sure he is, my little one. He must be very proud to see the strong and special girl you have become." Lily smiled, that smile that illuminated the entire environment. "You know, sometimes I dream about him. In the dream, he is always smiling and says that I found the dad he asked God to take care of me." Richard hugged her, feeling his heart overflow with love. Life had given him a precious gift at the most unexpected moment. Through Lily, he had learned the true meaning of family, not the one determined by blood, but the one that is built with love, patience, and dedication. The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with colors that Lily could no longer see, but could feel in the soft breeze that touched her face. Vala let out a lazy yawn, snuggling closer to her. "Dad," she called again, her voice sleepy, "do you promise that we will stay together forever?" "I promise, my little one," he replied, kissing her forehead, "forever and ever." True love, he had learned, didn't need eyes to be seen. It was in the small gestures, in the caring words, in the mutual trust they had built. It was in the family they had formed, in the lives they were helping to transform. And so on that quiet night, Richard silently thanked the fate that had placed that little girl in his path. She had not only given a new meaning to his life, but had taught him the true essence of unconditional love. 5 years had passed since Richard and Lily became a family. The girl, now 11 years old, had transformed into a talented young pianist, recognized not only for her exceptional musical ability, but mainly for her ability to inspire other people. The foundation they had created grew far beyond initial expectations. What had started as small performances in hospitals was now a robust project, which had already helped hundreds of children with special needs. The work of investigation and prevention of irregular adoptions, led by Pete, had become a national reference. One Sunday morning, as the family gathered for the traditional lunch, Pete arrived earlier than usual. His face showed an unusual agitation. "Mr. Lucas," he called, barely containing the emotion in his voice, "we found him. We found Peter." The boy, who had disappeared years before at the hands of the Mendez, had been located in a foster home in upstate New York. He was alive, but urgently needing the heart treatment he had never received. Lily, who was listening to everything in silence, held Richard's hand tightly. "Dad, can we help him?" "Of course, little one," Richard replied without hesitation. "We're going to do everything we can." In the days that followed, they mobilized all possible resources. Peter was transferred to New York City, where he finally received proper treatment. Richard personally assumed all costs, and the foundation ensured that he had all the support he needed for his recovery. "It's like closing a cycle," commented Zephyr, while preparing a basket of sweets to take to the hospital where the boy was. Hospitalized. Finding him after so long, being able to help. Maria, who was also dedicated to caring for the boy, agreed emotionally. And to think that it all started with our Lily. In fact, Lily's story had become a symbol of hope and transformation. Her music touched hearts, her strength inspired people, and her smile illuminated even the darkest days. The girl practiced tirelessly, dedicating hours to the piano. Her agile fingers created melodies that seemed to tell stories of pain, of overcoming, of love. In her performances, it was not uncommon to see people crying, touched not only by the music, but by the story behind it. "You know, Dad," she said one night after another successful performance, "sometimes I think that losing my sight was a gift. "What do you mean, little one?" Richard asked, surprised. "If I could still see, maybe I wouldn't have learned to see with my heart. I wouldn't have met you, or Grandma Zephyr, or Aunt Maria. I wouldn't have discovered music in this special way." Richard felt the tears fill his eyes. His little Lily had become so wise, so deep in her reflections. Valor, already an adult dog but still incredibly dedicated, rested his head on her lap, as he always did when he felt her emotional. The bond between the two was something extraordinary to see. Life in the house followed its own rhythm, full of love and joy. Zephyr, despite her advanced age, continued to be the heart of the home, filling the rooms with her warmth and wisdom. Maria was a constant presence, always bringing new stories and special treats. Pete, who initially was just a hired investigator, had truly become part of the family. His commitment to protecting vulnerable children had made him a reference on the subject, and he often gave lectures sharing his experience. It was during one of these lectures that something extraordinary happened. Among the participants was a doctor who had worked on Lily's case in the beginning, when she began to lose her sight. He had been following the latest research on her, a specific type of condition. "There is a possibility," he explained to Richard after the lecture. "An experimental treatment that has shown promising results in cases similar to hers." Richard felt his heart race. "Are you saying she could regain some of her vision?" "Yes," the doctor completed. "It wouldn't be a full recovery, but it could allow her to distinguish shapes, lights, maybe even colors." The news was both exciting and frightening. Richard decided to talk to Lily very carefully. He didn't want to create expectations that could end in disappointment. "Honey," he began during one of their special moments on the porch, "I need to tell you something important." With all the sensitivity possible, he explained about the experimental treatment. Lily listened in silence, absently caressing Valor's fur. "And what do you think?" she asked finally. "The decision is yours, little one. No one will pressure. You are already perfect exactly as you are." Lily was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "You know, Dad, I've gotten used to my world of sounds and sensations. I learned to see in a different way, but it would be nice to be able to see your face," she completed softly. "See Grandma Zephyr's smile, the colors of the garden that Aunt Maria described so much." The decision to try the treatment was made with much love and support from the whole family. The sessions would be long and require a lot of patience, but Lily faced everything with the same courage as always. Months passed. The results began to appear slowly. First, a greater sensitivity to light, then the ability to distinguish shadows. Each small progress was celebrated as a great victory. One special afternoon, after another treatment session, Lily held Richard's face in her hands. "Dad," she said, tears streaming down her face, "I think I can see a little of your smile." The moment was of indescribable emotion. The whole family was present: Zephyr, Maria, Pete, even little Peter, already recovered from his heart surgery. Valor, always attentive, wagged his tail as if he understood the importance of that moment. "But you know," Lily continued smiling, "through the tears, even if I couldn't see anything, I would still know exactly what you are like." "What do you mean, little one?" "Because I learned to see with my heart, and the heart never deceives when love is true." Richard hugged his daughter, feeling an immense gratitude for all the paths that had brought them there. Life had taught him that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as challenges, and that true love has the power to transform any darkness into light. The foundation continued to grow, helping more and more children. Little Peter, now recovered, had become a living symbol of hope. Lily's story inspired people across the country, showing that there are no limits when there is love and determination. That night, While the whole family gathered for another special dinner, Richard looked around the table, his heart overflowing with love. There they were, his daughter Lily, so strong and special, Zephyr, with her grandmotherly love, Maria, always dedicated, Pete, the faithful friend, little Peter symbolizing hope, and Valor, the tireless guardian. A family built not by blood, but by daily choices of love and dedication. A family that proved that the strongest bonds are those that the heart chooses to create. Lily played a new song on the piano after dinner, a composition of her own that spoke of love, overcoming, and gratitude. And as the notes filled the house, Richard was sure there was no more beautiful vision than the one that the heart could see.